and welcome to Invisible Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. I'm your host, Dean Anderson, and on today's show, we have a man who wears many hats. We have Andrew Gough.
Awesome. Thanks, Dean. I appreciate being here.
Oh, it's awesome for you to be here. And I'm not gonna just introduce Andrew. I've got someone else I have to introduce. We've got Riggs here today too. No, he's not even going to look at me.
No, he's doing his job.
He's doing his job. So welcome, Riggs. Welcome, Andrew. So, Andrew, we have you on the show today, and I said in the intro that you wear many hats. So, retired from the London Police, military background. But first and foremost, I want to talk about your T-shirt that you have on there.
Yeah.
The VA, or otherwise known as Veterans and Everyday Heroes. Can you tell me a little bit about that organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I started this, I would say, unofficially in 2018. I was seconded to the Ontario Police College as an instructor. And when I arrived there, I had recently received Riggs, who is a service dog. I was diagnosed with a PTSI or PTSD or OSI, post-traumatic stress disorder, in 2016. And Riggs was what I chose as an option for my wellness, having seen other veterans and first responders with service dogs. During that experience, being at the police college and having Riggs and exposing all these other officers to, a police officer who was overtly and openly suffering from a mental health injury, it started to get attention. I didn't expect it to. And those recruits were very supportive. And in support of myself in raising money for other officers and soldiers that were looking to receive service dogs, they stood behind me and helped me raise a lot of money for a cause. Seeing that power that we had, I decided to create an organization, a not-for-profit, and make it official. These dogs cost $25,000 to $35,000. So it takes a lot of T-shirt sales to raise that money. There are other avenues for us, but that's why I started it, was to bring kindness to the veteran and first responder community.
So many questions from that. First and foremost, I don't think people really truly understand the role of a service dog. I know there's a lot of, people kind of dismissing the concept or the idea or making fun of service animals and because they don't understand truly what the essence of what it means to have a service animal. Can you elaborate on Riggs's role when he does?
Absolutely. With a mental health injury, specifically, PTSD, and I use that. It's the more common understanding of what it is that I experience. There are, of course, symptoms. And although I won't be exhaustive, some of those symptoms that he helps me with are, and I'll be very real, suicidal ideations. When I first began this journey of understanding my mental health, I still struggle with it, perhaps not wanting to be here anymore. And one of the methods in which that was my preferred thought involved traffic and, running myself into something. And with him with me, I would never do that. He's my best friend, aside from my wife.
We'll be really conscious.
That's right. But he's my best buddy, and I would never do anything to hurt him. So by consequence of him being with me, it saves me, because I drive somewhere every day and those thoughts pop into my head, almost as habit now. I have difficulty in built up areas and environments with lots of people. He creates a barrier for me, as you see where he's sitting now. And when we first entered the studio, Dean, he doesn't know you very well. So instinctually or by training, he creates that separation, that space, which makes me feel more at ease. When I'm at a restaurant or, getting coffee, I will put him facing in whatever direction I'm feeling activated by, because you have to appreciate hypervigilance is very common in soldiers and police officers in general. And then top that off with a mental health injury. When I put him in those places, that removes often 180 degrees of my concern, because I know that if he reacts, something is coming from behind me or from the side of me. So I don't worry about it. For some, it helps with nightmares. It helps with their anxiety. Should they exhibit those signs, they're having or about to have a panic attack. Service dogs can interrupt that in many different ways. A lot of what they're able to do is individual to the recipient as well. The way I present panic or the way I present anxiety isn't the same as you, Dean, necessarily. So they can tailor those responses to the person.
Those heightened senses that the dogs have would make them even more acute or aware of your subtle changes in your body language and heart rate and that sort of thing. Is that true?
Absolutely. I would say we're fairly in sync now. It didn't take a whole lot of time for him to understand my idiosyncrasies, my habits. He can hear my heartbeat. And that's something that people, when I tell them that, they're like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. Right? So he is in tune with me. If I just do something that is typical of, say, me leaving, like he picks up on that immediately and he'll stand up and we'll be ready to go. Right? So he'll take me to my car if I tell him to. So they're so unique to the person and their needs that is often on top of a 2-year training period for most. That's why the costs are so high. You're asking a trainer for 2 years to feed, take care, and provide medical care for an animal, and usually these are purebreds. Not always. There's a huge cost to it, unfortunately.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I can see where that would be quite elaborate. Is there a role that you get to play in the training? I know that I've heard, and maybe it's just from television, the recognition of sometimes people get to participate in that or be around the dog during those training periods, and then sometimes they're not allowed to be around those dogs in the training period. What's your experience been?
So I personally am not involved in that. What I do have, because of the organization, are a number of service dog providers with different modalities that I'm able to reach out to that are more grassroots, so not large training organizations. That one I use in particular does the training model where it's a dog for 2 years. They train them exclusively, liaise with the recipient to find out what they specifically need, and try to train the dog up to that standard. The other modality is where the owner has, or the recipient has the dog, providing that care and the training on every other day that they are not going to meet with the trainer. So they'll often meet with the trainer once or twice a week to move on to the next step of their training because it's progressive. Still often a 2-year period for training, but different way to tackle it. Not everyone is, I'll say, capable or willing or confident to train a dog.
Sure.
Right? So having the two modalities is ideal. It's awesome.
Not a lot of people know this about me, some do. I spent a decade working in the pet industry a while ago. A lifetime ago. And in that process, we did pet training at the company that I worked for. And they used to say all the time that we train the person to work with the dog, not train the dog how to work with a person. Is there training involved for yourself? Like when you get a service dog, do you have to go through the process of being trained to how to work with rigs?
I would suggest to those that might be looking for a service dog that if the organization doesn't offer you handler training, that maybe you should look elsewhere.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's a big red flag.
I think so. I had not had a dog prior to him, except when I was a child. So I had no idea how to really handle a service dog. And I find that a lot of the individuals that are moving into that as an option do need that guidance, right? And you could tell when someone knows how to walk a dog and when someone has no idea, right? And when you're out in public, you need to know, right? It could, if you don't, it could raise questions about you and your dog, and organizations, businesses may question the validity of your animal, and that creates extra stress. So it's important for you to know, and you should be open for the training.
I could see where that might play with the validity of the service dog idea as a whole. If people are bringing service dogs into an organization and they're not well behaved, or the people don't know how to take care of the dog, then people start to question whether or not that's a legitimate service to be provided. So that probably wouldn't help with that either.
No, and those individuals that would make that choice to take an animal not certified and not appropriate, not only does that erode our welcoming into businesses and organizations, is if my dog that is trained and certified encounters yours and yours isn't one and it's reactive, it diminishes his effectiveness.
Okay.
Right? And then that in turn, depending on the reason that person has the dog, could have some serious consequences. Right? Now, not always the case for a psychiatric service dog, but imagine you have a seeing eye dog or a diabetic alert or seizure alert dog, and they're distracted, say in the middle of Costco. I don't know why that happens to be the place where I see a lot of dogs that probably aren't service dogs. That could cause some problems.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I recognize that Riggs has his "don't touch me, don't talk, no eye contact." I can't read it from here.
Yeah.
There's specific needs that Riggs has in order to stay on the job and do his work. Is there anything that you think that people wouldn't know or recognize? Like, does Riggs get to have table scrap? Does he get to sleep on the couch? Like, what are the, I know there's everybody has their own guidelines and rules, right? My dog at home can do whatever the hell it wants, but not a service dog. What does that look like for Riggs?
And for me, and this is just my philosophy, and I'm far from an expert, but for me, imagine yourself going to work every day, and sometimes for him, that it could be 12 hours. Even though I may have leisure time in between, I could be at a ball game, he's still on. To not provide him an opportunity to be just a dog, I think you would burn your animal out. So at home, he's our pet. He's our family pet. I know when I take him out, he's on, even though he's probably passed out right now. But so I don't have concerns about that.
Yeah. So I think there's lots of nuances there when it comes to ownership. Being a pet parent, or whatever that might look like. So the cost, we're talking about that big cost. So a lot of that time and energy that's put into that length of time, how do people normally afford? Are there other avenues other than VA for people to get access to service dogs if they're not, because I'm assuming VA is for people that are veterans and police or some sort of service individuals. Do you know if there's other avenues for people to get access to that?
I would say outside of the veteran and first responder community, unless you would need a service dog because you are blind or legally blind. Okay. I am not aware of, say, I'll use the term civilian, could get a dog for the same purpose at a reduced cost or free. Okay. I am not aware of any, which I get asked often, and I feel regret that I'm not able to provide a better answer. There are more, although not a lot, of options for veterans and first responders, programs through Wounded Warriors, Boots on the Ground. Those are just a couple that you're able to go to, and they have programs more robust than mine to provide service dogs for veterans and first responders.
Awesome.
Wait lists are huge, though.
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll have, your website and Boots on the Ground kind of go across the screen on the bottom so people can get access. We're going to go to a break real quick, but one quick answer or question. I noticed that they tend to be big, purebred dogs. Have you seen service dogs being trained in this manner, being a little smaller breeds or different types?
I have.
Yeah.
So it's not impossible, but and not to say that the size of the dog necessarily equates to intelligence, but they have to have the intelligence to be able to pick up the training. And sometimes the smaller ones, the instincts just aren't there.
Yeah, I got a little Chihuahua at home, and it wouldn't be doing anything.
Probably not.
No, it wouldn't be creating much of a barrier for safety, that's for sure. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Invisible, breaking through the stigma of addiction. Welcome back to Invisible, breaking through the stigma of addiction. And I still have Andrew on the show. He didn't leave during break, and Riggs stuck it out too, so that's great. Andrew, we had a great conversation about Riggs and the service dog, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about you and, a second motive for having you on the show. One being is that, this is a show about addiction. We recognize a direct correlation between trauma and addiction, and you had mentioned PTSD and PTSI and another acronym, I forget what it was. Yeah. But, recognizing that there's a correlation there. And I was wondering if you could speak to, the concept of trauma and addiction and, of course, the show on Stigma.
I'm sure there are outliers for sure that this isn't their experience. But for me, my experience of almost 25 years as a police officer, there is very little addiction without trauma. Mm-hmm. I feel that that is the foundation that whether it's childhood trauma or trauma from living your life, something you experienced, the trauma that police officers, firefighters, correctional officers, paramedics, soldiers, emergency room doctors and nurses, often that becomes our first line, whether we understand it or not, as a self-soothe or self-medication. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it's bred within our culture. Very, very young. I started policing when I was 19. Alcohol was part of it. After shift, I would go home. We used to do 7 night shifts in a row. Thank goodness that's not the case anymore. Mm-hmm. My breakfast was a can of beer before, I felt like I couldn't go to sleep without it. Mm-hmm. And that becomes habit. Mix that with your social or your culture, and that starts to breed that addiction. Mm-hmm. Definitely. I'm going to be cautious here.
I have some experience working with first responders and work with a clinic in a part-time sense doing with trauma and first responders. And I don't think people recognize that there is a subculture of drinking within police services and that idea. I'd love if you could expand a little bit more on what that subculture looks like, or to be a cop and the association with alcohol.
Yeah, and I will say that it's not what it was. Right, the culture is shifting and it's changing. Yeah, like most things, it's slow, mm-hmm. but it is occurring. Mm-hmm. However, 20-something years ago, it was, you would go drink after shift. You would, whether that was the morning, afternoon, or evening. There were nights where, either it was your friend group that you would meet for drinks after at a local pub, or where we would go over to our own association. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that, it was a debrief. It was a social debrief, but it's a bar, right? Mm-hmm. So people are going to have a drink, mm-hmm. and it's not water. Mm-hmm. Same with social events, maybe even ones that are organized. You're getting together, it's July, there's going to be drinks, Christmas parties. And that's not that different for many organizations. It's just something that you come to expect. It's going to be there, mm-hmm. right? So it's difficult to get away from, mm-hmm. right? Even a small kid from Northern Ontario who hadn't barely touched alcohol till they were 19. Mm-hmm. It was tough, mm-hmm. not to see it.
Yeah, nowadays we're looking more at the understanding of trauma, and we're recognizing more and more that people, the more they debrief or connect after a traumatic experience or several of them, the more they connect, the less likelihood it has of trauma. So we recognize that the debrief becomes more and more important, and it sounds as if that was an attempt at trying to connect after long days at work and using alcohol as a resource for trauma, or to express ourselves after such events.
Right. And that goes back decades, right? And maybe centuries or more, right?
Sure.
Where the intention of it is very positive. We've just had this thing happen, or in the case of policing, not all of us are aware of what everyone has done in their shift. And it's a way for you to offload what you've experienced. But coupled with alcohol, it makes for a dangerous habit.
It doesn't go there. Would you mind elaborating a little bit on how that journey continued for you in your relationship with alcohol?
Definitely. It became where it left that formal debriefing session, right? After work with colleagues to my days off. Or if I didn't have that opportunity after shift, taking that home. I am an alcoholic. I would always have 3 tall boys in the fridge every day. I would have a minimum of 2. 3 would be if it was a little bit worse. It was just enough to give me a little bit of buzz to where I could feel like I could be a dad or I could be a partner, although I wasn't. Right? Now, did that get me drunk? No, but it was the purpose of why, right? The intention to have those 3 was to numb a little bit. Now, once or twice a week, that 3 would turn into 6, would turn into 10, but it was often a minimum of 3 a night. And that spilled into, how my family started to perceive me. It started off to be, oh, here's fun, Andrew. And then it very quickly became something different, where I was relying upon it to be in social settings. I would make people think that first beer was actually my first beer when it was probably my third, right? By drinking around a corner or chugging a beer in the garage. Yeah.
I appreciate that a lot. And I also want to recognize that it's not necessarily about quantity. A lot of the people that talk about it assume that if I'm drinking every day or it's a problematic behavior, it means I'm blacking out or I have to drink 20 beers, but I only have 2 or 3 a day, so therefore it's not a problem. And I like that you recognize and say, a couple of tall boys, but it sounds as though, you're saying it was quite literally self-medicating.
It was the purpose. It wasn't the amount.
Yeah. And that's what it comes down to, the why, right?
Yes.
And then asking about the why. And then how did that progress? I'm assuming the way you're sitting here now that you're not a drinker anymore, you practice abstinence. Is that the lifestyle?
No,
okay.
No, not at all. What I do is I'm selective when I choose to have anything.
Okay.
And I have developed a strategy to limit myself. But I often say it out loud. Because there's a lot of social pressure. Oh, do you want a drink? Here, have another. Can I get you another one? And I say to those people, I'm honest about it. Like, I've had a problem with drinking before, and you are not allowed to serve me more than 2. If it becomes more than 2, I'm doing it for the wrong reasons, and it has to be something that I truly enjoy. I'm not going to take something I don't enjoy for the sake of just having alcohol in my system.
And how is that received? One of my biggest things that I deal with every day, and I'm sure that most people in my field deal with, is the objections or the worries about what people will think or how they'll react when people have that very vulnerable or transparent, hey, I'm only having 2 because XYZ. How are you met? How are you met with that?
At first, I think any of the issues were internal. I felt, oh, this is odd, right? Like this, because I left that culture where you just didn't turn it down. It continued to come until it was time to go home. But now, because people understand my experience and what I'm going through, and because I'm honest, I think that they can appreciate it. I get pushback from time to time, but I have to stick with what's right for me. I love a good craft beer. I think it's delicious, right? So sure. I have to limit my quantity. Right? Instead of getting a full pint, like at home, if I want a beer, I often just have that much. I'm in it for the flavor of it, not for what it might do for me. Right. So it's gotten better, and people understand me now.
I'm going to ask you about something that we've never talked about on the show. What about zero alcohol beverages? I mean, you're talking about, not for what it does, but for the taste and flavor. They really expanded over the years. Do you have any experience with that?
Most of the ones that I think are popular taste like beers I don't enjoy. I wouldn't get them in the alcohol version.
Okay.
But if someone made like a zero alcohol IPA or a nice amber, I would certainly give it a shot.
Well, you're in luck because they're out there. It's really expanded. It's become a pretty big thing. So lastly, the question about, when you are met with those objections from other people and people say, hey, or they give you a hard time, how do you deal with that?
I just find I'm honest, and I have a sidekick that, maybe that's a bit of a benefit, right? So not everyone has this. And I'm just like, they know that I have a mental health injury. They know that I have an issue with alcohol. I have no problem taking all the criticism, and because I don't internalize it, because this is my life. And I know where I can go should I not follow my own rules. And that is not a good spot.
Okay. Not a lot of people are that lucky, so I'm glad that you're able to, do it that way, and that works for you. Some people don't have that luxury. So what role does Riggs play, in, if any, in your capacity to change your the way you interact with alcohol? Those changes, has that made any impact?
Maybe not in the way that some may think. Like, part of that introduction to alcohol and the staple of it in my life was going to those places where it was readily available and bountiful. I don't go to those places anymore.
Oh, okay.
Right? Going with him is often, just a pain, or I don't feel safe in those places anymore. So as a consequence of having him, I'm not going to the bars. I'm not going to the pubs. I'm not going to those large events. Part of that's my mental health injury as well. Sure. But it limits that access immediately.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show, Andrew. So we're going to start a new thing, Dogs for Sobriety or something. No,
there you go.
We're not going to go there. But we recognize the value that Riggs plays in your life, and I appreciate your vulnerability and being on the show today. So thanks so much. We'll put that across the screen, and people can look for ways to contribute and help with VA and all the great work you're doing. Thanks again.
Incredible. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you for watching Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction, and we'll see you next time.